Welcome to the Once and Future Authors podcast. I'm Stephanie, and I'm super excited today to be joined by two of my absolute favorite authors who have an interesting connection between the two of them. First, we have Catherine Manett, the author of Runaway Home Tempered and Runaway Home Shattered. You are going to adore meeting Catherine, and then you're definitely going to want to hear how she is connected with one of our other favorite authors here. Bill McGee is the author of two incredibly different books. If Catherine's are in a series, Bill's are like the opposite of a series. Uh, Attention all passengers, the airline's dangerous descent and how to reclaim our skies is a nonfiction book about the state of the airline industry, written long ago enough that we would wish that by now it was irrelevant. And unfortunately, it is more relevant today than it was when it was first written. Um, Bill is also the author of Half the Child, an incredible novel about an interesting family situation that he will definitely get into. But Bill brought us Catherine, and I couldn't be more excited. I love when our authors bring another author, and Bill introduced us to Catherine here at Red Penguin Books, and I'm thrilled. So, Bill, why don't you tell us about the connection, since you're the one who connected us all?
Sure. Well, uh, here we are, editors, publishers, authors. We got a little bit of a mix of everything tonight. So in one of my many other lives, I taught creative writing for 10 years at Hofstra University here on Long Island. And when you teach over time and you have 40 or 50 students a semester, as the years go by, many of them you don't remember them, you don't remember their names, you don't remember their faces, and you don't remember their work, in many cases. And in other cases you do. And so about, I guess I want to say 12 years ago or so, Catherine was my student in a creative writing class, in a fiction class, I believe. And she started a novel and it was very good. And I encouraged her. And then she went her way and I went mine. I haven't taught there in many years. And then during COVID, she tracked me down, I think through social media, LinkedIn, or she hired a detective, something, I forget the details. And she said to me, "Do you remember me?" And I have to tell you, in her case, it was all three. I remembered the face, I remembered the name, but most important, I remembered the work. Sometimes you remember the students from, how they act up in class, but you don't remember what they wrote. And in her case, I remembered all three. And I said, "What's going on?" And she said, I'm working on that book and I want to finish it. And we were all on lockdown. And she asked if I would edit it. And so I was honored to do so. So we did the whole thing by Zoom, right? And the entire experience was done in like Monday night Zoom sessions. At times I had to take a break and just go and bang my head on a wall. No, I'm just kidding. That was a dream to work with,
Tell the truth.
but she is definitely very, very strident in what she believes, and she's not a pushover, which is good. You want that in an author. So we locked horns a few times, but it was all good. And so here we are, right? So I'm in a position of working with Red Penguin because, as you know, you were so kind, Stephanie, to mention Half the Child, my novel. As you know, Red Penguin published the audio version of Half the Child. I forget the name of the guy who did what was his name? Oh, that's right, your husband, Kieran Larkin, who did a fantastic job with the audio version. And so when Catherine was telling me her travails, as we all know what it's like out there getting published, I said, well, I'm going to recommend a woman that you should talk to. And I think you know the rest.
Well,
So that's how we're all here. So, I mean, here we have an author and the author's editor and the author's publisher all in one discussion. So this should be fun.
exactly. And I thank goodness for the day that you walked into my set of a show for an author interview. And the rest, as we say, has been history. I was thrilled to pieces when you brought Catherine to me, came to my house, dropped off a copy, and said, "This is what's going on with this book. If you're interested." And I was incredibly interested. Runaway Home has been an amazing two books so far. I'm sitting here with bated breath because there's more. So I thank you very much for bringing me this fabulous author. Welcome, Catherine.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, thank you both for having me, and you both know the trials that come with trying to get a book published. And in my case, it was just such a unique situation because the publisher that I was working with was transitioning out of the business. And so I had to try to find someone else, and I couldn't even have dreamed to find a better publisher. So I'm just so happy with Emperor Books and Red Penguin. So thank you so much.
You're very
Everything.
welcome. I'm excited to hear a little bit about the editing process. You know, so often as a publisher, the book comes to me and it's, you know, people don't call the publisher until the book is in some sort of shape, shall we say. So I'm so excited when Bill suggested, hey, let's do a little three-way, hearing about what goes into editing. And we're not talking about like the comma's in the wrong place.
No.
We're talking about editing, and I'm excited to hear about this.
A lot of arguing, Stephanie.
Her words, not mine.
I'm very hard-headed about my characters in my book, but I know my work needs a little sprinkle of McGee with his magic touch. But something I love telling him, like when I sent the final draft of Shattered over to you, I love telling him I kept that part that you hated. I kept it in there. And he was like, "Oh, right. Well, I guess it's still there then."
You know, in the end, she's the client, right? I mean, it's like when you bring a car into the garage and they say, well, you're going to need new brakes. You say, well, I don't have the money right now, so I'm just going to keep driving with the bad brakes,
Yeah.
how's that for an analogy?
There we go. There we go.
So
Is it scary, Catherine, bringing your book and you're kind of asking? I mean, Bill is a seasoned professional here as a writer and an educator and editor, and you're bringing your book, you're laying it bare, and you're kind of saying, "Help me," but not about this part because that part stays
Right.
in. I mean, how does that work?
And I don't know why I was so hard-headed about that part, because he was right. The part was irrelevant. It really had no importance. And when he pointed it out, I was like, he's kind of right. But then I'm like, I want it there. So it made it through to the final draft. And I haven't heard any negative reviews on that
There
part.
we go. There we go. Just
you haven't read mine, obviously, but that's another story.
I'm gonna plant one of those. Oh, everything was great except for page 132. What the heck?
This 2 paragraphs was horrible, pointless.
Well, I learned, Catherine, well, actually, Stephanie, you and I spoke about this years ago when we were talking. You had me on your show, and I was sitting on the big red couch, right? And we were talking about both of my books because they are very different, as you said. One is fiction, one is nonfiction, and one is traditionally published, Attentional Passengers by HarperCollins, a major publisher, agent, the whole standard route, advanced, the whole thing. And then the other one, Half the Child, I self-published.
Right.
But I'm so glad it happened in that order, because having been through the publishing experience with a publisher, I learned how to be a self-publisher. I just basically said, like, okay, now I'm HarperCollins, right? And obviously I don't have the budget. I don't have all the skills and expertise and staff, but I tried to emulate as best I could, and I found, and the key thing I did was I found really good people to work with, right? And so I found a really good artist that did the cover, and I found a good copy editor. We'll talk about that a little bit more, I hope, copy editing. After Catherine signs off, we'll talk more about copy editing. But having been through all that, what really struck me was I remember talking to my agent, because you hand in a book, and Attentional Passengers is like almost 400 pages or something, and then there's silence, and then all of a sudden you get this email with this huge file, right? And my editor at the time there, she had just a ton of edits, and I remember talking to my agent and saying, well, I agree with some of them. I don't agree with others. On some, I'm on the fence. I could go either way, very much like what Catherine was just saying, right? And then I said, and then there are some that I will die on that hill. There's no way I'm going to give up X, Y, and Z, right? No, this has to be. And he gave me really good advice. My agent said to me, you have to pick your fights. He said, you're never going to win them all. And he said, fight for what is most important. So I never told her this, but I will tell you that I am proud of Catherine for sticking by her guns, because I don't want to like encourage her to keep, making my life difficult, but
I was gonna say, I believe we had a very long argument over a specific expletive and whether if it was one word or two words, and that was like
yes,
an hour-long
yes,
conversation. I
yes.
was trying to explain that one part of it was a noun and one part was a verb, and he was saying, "No, it's just one word."
Right. But
Yeah,
unfortunately, you were wrong,
I was wrong, but I couldn't let it go.
So, I mean, again, you have to choose what hill you're going to fight on and what hill you might possibly die on, right? And so, and I've also learned, and here's the cover of Attentional Pastors. I'm not trying to sell books, but it's a good cover, and people like it for the most part. But when they sent it to me, right, this was, HarperCollins went out and got an artist and photographers, and they gave me three, and the other two were awful, right? And this was clearly the best one, right? And I said, well, is there another option? I wanted like a fourth option. My agent was like, look, you're getting three. And so I said, okay, well, definitely we'll take this one. And then about a couple of days later, I said, wait a minute, did they give me two lousy ones because they knew that I had to pick one of the three? So that's what I did, right? And so sometimes, that's the case too, right? And it was like, this was clearly the best of the three. The other two were like, no way, can't do it.
Right.
And I said, well, okay. So I felt okay about the cover. But if it had been the only choice, I would have said, no, let's see it. Let's see something else, right? So basically, many of the experiences Catherine went through, I had been through as well. But I don't want to encourage her to, keep it up in the future. But
There's
So
another
get
book
ready
to
for
go.
book 3.
we still have one more book to do.
Another
Ready.
book to go. Catherine, did you know in advance when you turned over your manuscript where your, I'll say, problematic or weak points are, and that came to pass? Or were there some surprises, like you thought, okay, he's gonna jump all over chapters 2 to 4, but chapter 7, man, I'm loving that one, and you were kind of surprised.
Right. I feel the first go around, it was surprises. Like I didn't even realize some of the things that he pointed out until he pointed them out. But then when I got to know him as an editor, I would find myself writing and be like, no, McGee's not gonna like that. I'm
Oh, he
taking
was
it
in
out
your head
for
then.
him. Yeah.
Like, oh
Or
boy.
McGee is gonna love this. Like, I can't wait to see his little comment on the side of the Word document. Like, ooh. I remember one of my favorite things you ever wrote was in book 1. You wrote, "This is one of the best descriptions of a young woman I have ever seen from another young woman." And it was when Kara was describing Haley. And so I kept that in the back of my mind, and I'm like, okay, the description, the people describing other people, the characters
Right.
describing other characters, make them as authentic as possible, because not only do you have to describe what a character looks like, but you have to put it through a lens of what they look like to someone else. So it's fun to kind of play with those dynamics.
So after a while, you actually had a little bill on your.
Little McGee, an angel McGee and a devil McGee. How much?
They come in pairs. Yeah, that's how
Yeah.
it works. Yeah.
One is Bill and one is McGee. So
Okay. I want to get that on like a t-shirt or something like that. That's a
Now imagine, Stephanie, imagine this conversation strung out over like 6 months, once a week. Okay, all right. So now you're getting a little taste of my life. Okay.
And what about when you're getting closer to that finish line? Does it feel like, there's my husband always says when he goes to get his hair done, no matter what, they do his hair, etc. And he's by the way mostly bald, so it's even funnier. There's always the hairdresser. There's just one more. There's just one more little fix on it. There are stories that Picasso would walk around with a paintbrush in his pocket because even in a museum, he was touching things up. Is there ever really a finish line, or does the line just keep like? I hear that from authors all the time, and I'm wondering, especially in this collaborative approach.
actually have this thing where I will not, well, now I have to because I'm writing book 3, but I will not reread my books after they're published because I will freak out about things. Like, I will get so obsessed with, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that. But the editing process is, I'm sorry, Bill, it's so annoying. Corrections,
Not
and then you
personal.
send it in and you think it's great, and then he sends it back and it's still not good, and then you're like, now it's perfect, and then he sends it back again. I'm like, what's wrong with it now? That's the worst part. Writing it is so fun. Editing it is like torture. It's horrible.
No, I get
Wow. What can I say to that?
that. What's that you really feel?
So, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I
Well,
never
all
have a
I can
problem
say is you're
telling anyone
welcome.
how I really feel.
Well, if she doesn't say thank you, I certainly will because I adored books 1 and 2.
Thank
Wait for
you.
book 3. Even if it means there'll be blood on the floor between the two of you.
Well, thankfully, as I said, most of this is done by Zoom, so there's that.
Yep.
Now, how
And
about you, Bill? When you started, I mean, yes, she was your student a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
Did you know what you were getting yourself into, really? Or did it kind of become revealed to you, kind of like sunrise when you start? Oh, is that what we're looking at here?
True. Well, I got to know a very different Catherine than the young woman who was sitting in my classroom with 19 other students many years ago. And I'll just leave that sentence at that. I won't expand on it, but a very different young woman.
I've always been the same person, so he just didn't know me those many years ago.
I guess not, but I do now. And so, yes, I mean, again, as I say, I sometimes remember the students, but I always, remembering the work is more important, and I remembered the work. And so, I had no hesitation when she reached out to me. Because if I wasn't sure, if I didn't remember, to be like, well, what am I getting myself into? It's a commitment on my part too. It's obviously a commitment on the author's part, but it's a commitment on my part. And I would never want to say yes and then abandon a project. That would be awful. So, but I remembered it and I said, okay. But she has a much different demeanor one-on-one on a Zoom than she did when she was sitting in my class with 19 other students in a big circle, right? So there's that. So
He's very strict about phones. I remember that. He would point anyone out that had their phone on their desk right away. So mine was always away. I was like, nope.
well,
Called
Good.
out
I mean,
no
I can that and that was what, 12 years ago. I mean, I can only imagine now. I
like
mean,
now, yeah.
I mean, now you have a generation that, we're given phones in their cribs, right? I mean, so, I mean, my gosh, I can't imagine teaching now. I really can't in that sense. I do still do some teaching at Vaughan College of Aeronautics, but it's by Zoom.
Mm.
And when I went back, I had taught there years ago, and I taught there last semester. And I said to the chair, I said, so how does it work with the Zoom? She said, well, I'm going to give you some very good advice. She said, I would strongly urge you to take it. Do not allow anyone to do this.
Ah, yes.
Okay.
Where did he go?
And right, and so I didn't. And small classes for the most part, but all of a sudden there'd be a black box and excuse me, hi, you with us?
Hmm.
And and sometimes it's because somebody else was in the room with them or they were in a public place and the cafeteria. Doesn't matter. We don't care what's going on in the bag. We don't care about the cats walking across. Just want to make sure you're engaged. I'm not going to talk to just names on a thing, right? But
Oh, it's
but
not
anyway, yeah. So yes, I did get to see a different Catherine. But the work speaks for itself. The work, it's on my part, it's just been a joy working with her. It really has.
well, Bill, let me ask you a question. You spoke about the author having to choose whether it was you with your editor in the past or even
Right.
Catherine. You kind of have to choose your battles. You have to decide what hill you're going to die on, etc. How about as the editor? Do you also have the okay? My name is not mentioned in this book unless this passage is that a thing?
Yeah. It hasn't been, but hey, we still have one more book to go. So I do not want to
Just
speak
wait.
prematurely. I do not want to speak before this is all done. So I will say to you that yes, I mean it's just a different role. It's not that I don't care because I care very much, but it's one thing for me to fight an editor and say, no, you have to keep this section in. In this case, she's the boss, and she's the client, right? And I'm working for her. And so in the end, all I can do is give my strong advice and say, well, okay,
Words,
go
some of
ahead and do it the wrong way if you'd like.
the
Please,
way you word some of your comments though too. I think it's shattered. Yeah, it's shattered. Where Kara's just has the sit down meeting with her boss in the insurance company, and you just write in the side, nothing happens here. A guy falls off a chair. That's about it. That's the
4 or 5 pages of a guy, and finally he falls off his chair,
guy
and I'm like,
falls off a chair.
you know, and
Like, you have to
I'm,
leave it because he didn't chair.
I'm,
Like, perfect.
I'm trying to be an academic again, and I'm thinking like, okay, what would they have said when I was in an MFA program? Let's talk about, character development, and let's talk. And it's like, no, it's just a scene where nothing happens, and guy falls off a chair. Like, do we need this? And
I'm
then of
glad we
course she doubles down. It's like, oh no, we have to have the guy falling off the chair. I'm like, okay, I vote no, but in the end, she has, we each have one vote, but it's not a democracy.
characterization of the chair. It's weak. It's uncontrollable, unpredictable. I needed to characterize the chair.
Okay, well,
Over 5 pages. It
on
had
my watch though, she has to do this, right? It's like, so in the end, she's always going to win. It's not a democracy, right? We can both vote, but her vote is more important than mine. And, so many times I just say, okay, then we'll do it your way, you know?
I don't know why I was so stubborn on that. I have to reread it, but I don't know why I was so
But
stubborn.
you don't read your book, so never mind.
No, I reread when I'm editing them. I feel like I read them 100 times, and then I'm like, never reading this again. But somehow,
One of these days, somebody is going to log on to Goodreads or Amazon or whatever, and they're going to comment on and
better
share.
not be you.
It
better
will not be me. I don't have phantom accounts. It's not me. But one of these days,
Well, Catherine, let me ask you, there are parts that you did not even understand what was happening in the scene until your trusty editor illuminated you, shall we say? Were there things that you said, oh, okay. Well, I didn't even see that little Easter egg hook, side of him, things like that. Did that happen?
I'm trying to think of a specific
Bill seems to know one because his face lit up.
no,
Oh, you don't know one?
no, I'm just listening.
I'm trying to think of a specific instance. I know that he's pointed out a lot of things that needed he's given me so many scenes that he's like, well, maybe you should write a scene like this. I remember specifically in book 1 where he was like, just think about where Peter comes from, a small, very small town, and like how incredible must it be for him to walk into, let's say, like a grocery store and see something like of that size.
a
So
small town in Scotland, mind you. You're
right,
burying the
right.
lead there. It's not a small town
Right.
in Kansas.
Yeah,
Right.
no, it's a small town in Scotland, Bill. Thank you for reminding me. I totally forgot.
Stephanie, you're seeing how this goes.
I'm seeing this whole passive aggressive thing. I can only imagine how those sidebar comments went.
No, it's the first time with a witness, so this is very interesting.
Oh, this is so much fun. I'm loving this.
Yeah.
No, this is just how we interact, I think, at this point. But yeah, no, he suggested so many scenes. And another thing that he pointed out was the last scene of Tempered, which is it's a big, huge, I'll call it a brawl. I don't know how to put that. He told me to break it up into multiple points of view because at first it was just a very long section narrated by one person. And I don't remember if Bill, if you remember that. And then with that suggestion, I broke it up into like 4 or 5 different narrators. And I think that was one of the best suggestions I have ever received on any of my work. I can't think of any things that I've had friends and family point things out to me and be like, oh, did you realize, I understand why the book is called Tempered because of the temperament of the characters, pointing at, I'm like, no, but yeah, sure. We'll go,
Or, oh, they live on Green Street because
you're
right. Right.
Bill,
right.
what do you remember pointing anything out to me? I feel like you have.
I was actually thinking of that brawl scene as well. It was sort of a Rashomon thing, the Japanese movie where you have perspective from multiple characters and how nobody tells the same story twice, right? Everybody has a different view, right? And that's just how it is. I mean, you see a car accident and 5 different people will say 5 different things happened, right? And so yes, there's that. But I always remember I not only taught at Hofstra, I was a student there myself many, many years ago, and I have a degree in creative writing from Hofstra as well. And I remember there was an author named Thomas Berger who came to speak, and it's like, I was 19 years old and wow, a real author, and got my signature and everything. And he was talking and he read, and it was a novel called Neighbors, and it became a movie with Dan Aykroyd and John Belushi. If anybody remembers that, you can look it up. And so this guy was sitting there, and when it was a Q&A, he said to Thomas Berger, who was a very well-respected writer, he said, can I ask you, what was the deal with having that whole canine thing going through the book with the dogs? And he said, what are you talking about? And he said, there's no dogs in the book. And he said, no, but there's these canine metaphors throughout the whole book. And he said, what are you talking about? And the guy cited, well, on in chapter 5, they refer to their kids as the pups. And in another scene, they're eating spare ribs and they're chewing bones. And in another scene, he has an itch and he scratches himself with his leg. And everybody was like, oh, wow. Most of us had read the book and nobody had caught this. The most shocked person in the room was Thomas Berger, the author. Right? And I'll never forget this, because I'm 19 years old and I'm thinking, well, writers are gods, right? We create, we are like creating, and on the seventh day we made a novel, right? And we're like, we're this whole world and these people that didn't exist, and we're giving life to them. And I'll never forget this. It just so changed my view of writing. Thomas Berger, this successful published author, I'll never forget what he said. He said, wow, I can't wait to go home tonight and reread my own book. Because he said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I was just like, wait, how did that happen? So there's this weird alchemist thing going on here, right? And it happens. And my advice to an author is always like, when somebody compliments you, yes, that was intentional,
That
of
was
course.
supposed
Yeah, I put a lot of thought into that. I'm glad you caught that,
Well, I think that the reader plays a huge part. We're talking about how we have the writer, the editor, the publisher on this call, but each of the readers creates in their own way, because from their own experiences, they bring their own life, their own experiences to your book. They're reading it, and honestly, whatever reality is created in their mind through that lens is different from reader to reader. They're actually part of the creative process.
This is a big debate that I get into with a lot of people who bring up my book, who the villain is in my novel. A lot of people, for some reason, say that it's Haley, and other people say that it's Tristan.
Yep.
And for me, it's just like I thought I had written clearly who I thought the
But
main
apparently not,
villain
right?
was, but apparently not. Other people think that one person did something worse than the other. A lot of people tend to blame Haley for the terrible things that went on in book 1. And when I was writing it, I kind of thought that she was manipulated and in a very hard situation to be in, and that the main villain was Tristan. But so many people think it was Haley because she was able to go against one of her close friends so quickly and turn on him. But I just thought that was
No, I think it's very true that there's a very fine line between villain and victim, and depending on what your life has dealt you, you're going to feel for one character and say, oh, no, she's only bad because of all these things that have happened to her. Or
especially with the addiction aspect. I have a lot of people, who will sympathize with her, and then other people who just will not. And I think that has been one of the most interesting conversations I've had with a ton of people. So
I think that goes for even the biggies. I mean, the Wizard of Oz, is it the Wicked Witch or is it the Wizard of Oz? There's definitely more than one way to look at that story. And that's why I said I think that your readers are just as much a part of this little three-way conversation we have with writer, editor, publisher, readers. And they're all going to bring something different. I'm kind of almost not surprised that the readers are finding connections and Easter eggs and things like that in books that were not there. Bill, for you as an editor, I would guess that sometimes you have to be kind of hard-nosed, and sometimes you have to be kind of a cheerleader. You really have to look at what's going on with Catherine, with the book. I'm sure sometimes you're thinking, I better tread lightly. And sometimes you're like, for God's sakes, you don't use a semicolon like that, or whatever it might be. How did you find that whole balance?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I guess, my assumption is, and I have to, it's sort of like being in a relationship and you forget to tell someone how much they mean to you, in a personal relationship, right? And my assumption is like, well, I'm here, right? And so sometimes you have to fight that and remember to say, I appreciate you, right? And my assumption is that, well, I wouldn't be working on this if I didn't think it had merit and I didn't think it was good, right? But I'm also a writer, so I know what it's like to be in that dark place where it's just like everything feels like it's not working and the rest of it. But I mean, for the record, I never would have taken on this project. I never would have worked with Catherine if I didn't, it's just too much of a time commitment. It's one thing to be in a class, 20 students and okay, read, 4 stories this weekend, whatever. But to take on a commitment like this, I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't something that was engaging and I was going to, like and respect. So that's what underlies the relationship, not the fact that we, bicker all the time on Zoom. That's beside the point.
All
But
in good fun.
no, but yeah, but I mean, there were times where I could just see like we were ending a Zoom on a sour note, and I would say, well, listen, you've got a lot of good stuff here and you're on a good track now, don't get despondent, do your work this week. We'll see you next week and make sure, you come back with more stuff. But yeah, look, as we all know, there's a lot of psychology involved in this whole process, and I've had, I've been between undergraduate and graduate and teaching, I've been in a lot of writing workshops over the years and a lot of different, both students and teachers. And some people are not that good at it, I think, and I always bring it back to baseball. It's like, being a manager of a baseball team and being a really good player, it's two different things. And if you look, many of the best, all-time best baseball managers did not have great careers themselves. They were either, like 200 hitters or on the bench, or they didn't even make it to the majors. They were in the minor, but they're great managers. And I have a theory about that. I think it's probably because they spent a lot of time on the bench watching other people and they learned, and some of the all-time great players did not make good managers, I remember reading a story about Ted Williams, who some people think is the greatest hitter of all time. He was not the greatest of managers. And at one point, one of his players was struggling and he didn't know how to articulate, right? He's like, well, do what I do. I hit 400, and it's like, well, you need to help me do that. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So when I was in graduate school, we had some really, really top-notch authors in the program as instructors. But some of my, favorite professors maybe are people that are not as well known, and so they're just really good because it's a different skill set. I mean, writing and teaching are two different things, and editing is yet another skill set. So, it's all different skills.
Catherine, I have no doubt that Bill's influence can be seen in so many places on every page. But tell me about the overall. It's been 2 books now that you two have worked together on. Not the granular, not even this scene, but you as a writer. Tell me what maybe the biggest influence that this process and working with Bill has had on you in the bigger sense.
I'm pretty sure it was Bill who had us listen in to a conversation as one of our assignments, right?
Yes.
And I remember we had to go anywhere and eavesdrop and listen to a conversation that other people were having. And for me, that comes naturally because I'm so nosy. No, I'm kidding. So I decided that I wanted to go off campus because I felt like I knew very well how girls my age and even boys my age spoke and how we communicated. But I was interested in learning how other people communicated. So I started listening into conversations everywhere I went just to listen to how, oh, look, there's 2 women who look like they're in their 50s or 60s. Let me hear how they talk to each other. Oh, there's children. Let me listen how these children are communicating with each other. And I think that influence has helped me tremendously with voice in my novels. I think one of my strongest aspects, I guess, of my writing is the voice and the dialogue that my characters have, and it's really because of Bill. I never would have thought to, really listen in and understand how people communicate with each other, different people. And I really think that's been a huge reflection on my work. So I would say that's the biggest influence he's had, but every single page of my book wouldn't be what it is without him. I mean, he's really taken my work from maybe level 1 to like level 10. So I mean, I really do appreciate it, no matter how much I screw around with him.
I love
Oh, sweet. Well, okay. I'll work on the next book with her. What the heck? All right.
Well,
What can I say to that?
not
Thank
that I
you.
want you to work on other books because you have book three to come. But you've been a classroom teacher, a Zoom teacher, and now this one-on-one. If you were going to go off and one-on-one with another author, and you have no time for that because there's book three coming, but what have you learned from this process working with Catherine that you might bring to your next project?
That's a great question. And I have to say, I mean, I used to say it as a, as a teacher that, I think good writers learn from their students and then from their work. And it's always easier to find fault in someone else's work, or even sometimes find the good in other people's work. And you can't, it's so hard to self-critique, and I know when I was very young, when I was, writing as a teenager and in my first years of college, I remember like I had like a very wide swing of emotions about my own work, where some days I was like, this is brilliant, and other days this is just absolute crap, right? And it's like, and there was no middle ground. And then when I started going to workshops, I found a little more centering where it was like, okay, like it's not the extremes, but how can we get it towards that? So with Catherine, I have to say that probably more so than with anyone I've ever worked with, because just the sheer amount of time that we worked together, I have learned about my own work in like at times I'll be talking to her and I'll say, well, you see, the problem here is such and such, and this character, I'm not clear on their motivation, and then I'll think of something that I'm working on, and I'm like, well, why don't I take that advice myself? Articulating to someone else what they should be doing, even when they don't listen to you, as I won't mention names, but as some people don't. But articulating that can help you, because it's forcing you to look at your own work as if you were your own student, right, or your own, editing client, and you're like, oh, right, of course, So there were many times where after we ended our Zoom, I wrote notes to myself about my own work because I was like, saying to her, do X, Y, Z. And I'm like, well, I need to do that too. So
I'm hoping, and I'm just going to keep my fingers crossed on this, that there's another novel in you, Bill, and that's where we're going. But I won't.
oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Another
But I'm
novel and
hoping.
hopefully another and hopefully a TV pilot too, working on that. So I stay busy as always, but the day job is tough these days, because those airlines just keep acting terribly and
Absolutely.
misbehaving.
Well,
So,
while you mentioned that, for your shameless promotion, because that's what we're all about here. Tell us a little bit about what you do in your day job, and about your books.
Sure. So I'm a consumer advocate, but a specific type of consumer advocate for airline passengers. Sort of evolved from me working in the airlines and then being a journalist and writing about the airlines, and then going to Consumer Reports and becoming an advocate. And so I work for a nonprofit in Washington called American Economic Liberties Project, and I'm the senior fellow, there's a nice title, for aviation and travel. And so, I testify in Congress, and I, meet with Secretary Buttigieg at the Department of Transportation and the FAA and places like that, and try and rein in these airlines on customer service and safety and so many other things. And Attention All Passengers came about. I didn't pitch it, believe it or not. I've pitched a lot of books in my day, but I didn't. I had an agent who was stuck on the tarmac. I didn't know the guy. My agent, he was stuck on the tarmac during the holidays. This was about 14 years ago. And they were stuck on a plane for like 8 hours, he and his husband, and, very frustrated. And he started Googling, and he started reading all the stuff that I had written about, the problems in the industry and solutions. And I got an email and he said, hey, blah, blah, blah. Have you ever thought about writing a book about this terrible industry and how awful they treat people? And that's how Attention All Passengers came along. And I was like, oh, sure. And he said, well, send me a proposal. I worked on a proposal. And then something really crazy happened. He sent it out and he sold it almost immediately. And of course, I popped champagne. It was my first book. I was teaching in Oxford at the time. And, popping champagne and friends and family, everybody's excited. And then it hit me like a ton of bricks. Oh, crap, I have to write it now. It's not like a novel where you've written it and you're sending it out. I sent out a proposal, and
Wow.
HarperCollins bought it on the first day, which was the good news. And but now what? Now I have to write it. So I wound up having to take leave of absence from teaching and from advocacy and all the rest. But so that's the day job. But fiction is obviously very close to my heart. And Half the Child, that there's an aviation component because the narrator is an air traffic controller at LaGuardia Airport. He gave him a nice, quiet, stress-free job. But I didn't want to write about aviation. It's a story about a custody struggle, as that cover indicates there, with a child that's split in half, echoing the biblical story of King Solomon with the sword cutting a child in half. And so yes, with Half the Child, it's funny when you were talking before and you were talking to Catherine and we were talking about the different perspectives. One of the things I used to always say to my students was, you make so many decisions when you write the first paragraph, especially of a novel, and you don't even realize it, right? And it's like, well, why is it in first person and not in third person? Why is it in present tense and not in past, right? And so I wrote Half the Child. It's a little unusual statistically. It's in first person and it's in present tense. And that's most novels, roughly speaking, are third person and past tense. But I wanted to write about it in real time. And I wanted to do the opposite of what I counseled Catherine on in that violent scene, right? So it's always do as I say, not as I do. I did not want a perspective from multiple. I wanted one person's perspective. I wanted to chronicle one person's journey in real time. And once you go to past tense, then everything changes because now we're wiser, right? And we could say, oh, that thing I did last year. So yeah, so that's why Michael Mullen, the narrator of Half the Child, as spoken by Kieran on the audio version. Things are happening to him. It is like a car accident. I was asked early on to do an elevator pitch, 2 sentences on the book, and I said it's like a real-time car accident because I'm for 361 pages. It's just his life is upended when his son is taken away from him and abducted by his mother. And I early on I said, well, I'm not going to write about this perspective from the child's perspective or from the mother's perspective or the judge's perspective or the lawyer's perspective. I'm going to write about it from one person's perspective. And that was a choice I made, and somebody else can make another choice. But other times, yes, I do multiple, narrators and multiple scenes, but every book is different, right?
I love the multiple narrators. I love writing in that style. So
yeah. But what did I tell you early on was that, and I think, you really made it work, was the danger there when you're starting out is that there's too much similarity in the voices, right? And I said to her, I remember saying to Catherine, like, I should be able to pick up a section and read one paragraph, if it's in first person, and know which narrator it is in some way, shape, or form, without any cheap tricks like, well, as Tristan, I'm saying, I mean, I should be able to do that. And I think, she got there, right? But that was a struggle, as it would be for anyone. I'm not saying
I think there was 2 voices in particular that you thought were too similar, and
yes,
we were able
and
to
like I
differentiate.
say, I mean, at the beginning of every section, as you know, Stephanie, she'll have the name, and so we know, okay, who's speaking. But I would say, no, take the name away, right? Like now, I should be able to know, okay, I know who's speaking.
Another thing that you pointed out, which was very hard for me to part with, but I did, so you should be proud of me. In the first draft, I have, well, if you remember from book 1, I have nobody, the character's name is nobody, and then it becomes somebody. But I had just question mark as the narrator, and he hated the question mark. I remember took it away, and I'm like, well, what am I don't want to call this person by their name. So I decided on nobody and somebody. And I just think that worked. So it just added another dimension to the work to begin with. So that was another thing that McGee definitely pointed out that changed.
So now we're back to McGee, not Bill, so we can tell there's a
Like
little
I
bit
said,
of a chill on
McGee and Bill. So I guess in this, McGee was the angel in that. When you're doing something else, then you're Bill. When I'm angry with you, you're Bill. And then McGee. Yeah, there you go.
Could have been William G, so who knows?
Yeah,
Okay.
right.
Yeah.
Catherine, tell us a little bit about Runaway Home, Tempered and Shattered.
Oh, okay. Runaway Home, Tempered and Shattered. I just love seeing it, looking at it right there. It's a passion project for me. Even as a teenager and in college, I knew that I wanted to work with those who were less fortunate. I was always very interested in the foster care system. And, I did a lot of volunteer work in college. And then when I had the opportunity to get the job where I work now, which is a caseworker for the Department of Social Services, I was really able to learn a lot more about the issues that Long Islanders face, specifically the opioid epidemic and just inaffordable housing. So writing this book, I wanted to write something that was entertaining and engaging and fun, like the books that I like to read, exciting and thrilling. But at the same time, I wanted to kind of teach people about what's actually going on in our communities, and different problems that I've seen not only through work, but just growing up here on Long Island. So although these characters are completely fictional, not based on anyone that I know in real life, the issues are very real. And it's the issues are so dear to my heart and close to me that, just writing this, it has been a dream for me to be able to put this down on paper. Not only is it cathartic, but like I said, I'm able to share kind of like, it almost feels like a piece of my soul and put it on paper.
Well,
Yeah, that's my way home.
I and the rest of our listeners can't wait for book 3 also.
Thank you.
And we want both of you to survive to the end of that. So behave.
It'll be fine.
I'll
He
send,
already knows what's coming, so.
okay.
There is that, yes, I
Write
will
it down.
say,
I'll send
book
you.
2 was easier than book 1, I will say that.
Okay, okay. So this is good. Oh, I see a little face there.
Yeah.
I think it's because I had the McGee's on my shoulder, the Bill and the McGee, like I said, so that's why.
There we go. So, yeah, and now they've got your ear. They're tugging on you.
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are going to be things that come across the Zoom or the desk, and he's going to say, "Aha! You fixed that before I even had to say it."
Oh,
Yep.
yes, I've already seen that, yes.
I love that. That's
As long
fabulous.
as we don't talk about punctuation, we'll be good.
There we go. Punctuation. It's relative anyway, so we will. Well, I can't thank the two of you enough. I can't wait to be reading more. And thank you for inviting us into your little private and sometimes contentious soiree
Gotta keep it fun and entertaining.
author-editor relationship. Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Thank
Stephanie.
you.
So welcome.